This is our last event of the semester. We've had tons of events this past year and in this spring semester, including several really good events that focus on today's Ukrainian literature. And we're very happy that today's event also focuses on contemporary Ukrainian literature and closes out our event cycle. We usually don't have events after we're done classes, so this is kind of different. So we're happy that you are joining us today in this format that we're presenting today. The name of our event is the pre-launch reading from The God of Freedom and conversation with Yuliya Musakovska. Yuliya and our Harriman Institute is celebrating the upcoming release of her poetry collection, The God of Freedom, in English translation from Arrowsmith Press. Joining us will be her translator, Olena Jennings. Today we'll feature readings both in Ukrainian and in Olena's English translation. And I'd like to talk a little bit about wartime Ukraine and the role of art and literature during this time in Ukraine. The God of Freedom was published in 2021 in Ukrainian, the original publication, and reflects on many events of Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine, which began, of course, in 2014 before taking on a full-scale form in 2022. This collection was shortlisted for the Lviv UNESCO City of Literature Prize, and it was included in the top 8 nominees for the Taras Shevchenko National Prize, which as of late, it's Ukraine's most prestigious literary award, which as of late really has come to express good quality Ukrainian literature. So it's considered very, very prestigious. And poems from the collection have been translated into many languages and published in various journals. Yuliya Musakovska is an award-winning Ukrainian poet and translator. She has published 5 poetry collections, among them Hunting for Silence, Men, Women, and Children, and The God of Freedom. She received many awards in Ukraine, including the prestigious Smoloskip Prize for Young Authors back in 2010, and the Dictum Prize. Her work has been translated into over 30 languages and published worldwide. Yuliya herself translates poetry from and to Swedish and English, focusing on the translation of a contemporary Ukrainian author. She is a member of Ukrainian Pen. And Olena Jennings is the author of the poetry collection The Age of Secrets, the Chapbook Memory Project, and the novel Temporary Shelter. She's a translator of Irina Shuvalova's poetry in the publications Pray to the Empty Wells, Katerina Klitko's in Nobody Knows Us Here, and We Don't Know Anyone, together with Oksana Lishin, and Vasil Makhno's Paper Bridge. Her translations with the author of Yuliya Musakovska's collection, God of Freedom, is forthcoming from Arrowsmith, as I mentioned. Olena holds an MFA from Columbia University and an MA from the University of Alberta. She's the founder and curator of Poets of Queens Reading Series and Press. So like I mentioned, we will have, after this brief hello from our guests, we will have a reading in 2 languages, and then we'll have a discussion. And I encourage all the viewers to input any questions that you have, whether you're on YouTube or in the Zoom chat here, and I will read them to our guests and to join the discussion. So welcome to the both of you. I'm very happy that you are joining us, and I very much look forward to hearing the poetry and their translations.
Thank you, Mark, for introduction. It's of course a pleasure to be here and present this book and talk a little bit about our situation, the experience that we are living through in Ukraine. So first I'm going to tell just a little bit about the book's background and how it was written. So this poetry collection was written in 2016 to 2021. And it includes the COVID years and also the years of war against Russian occupier forces in the east of Ukraine after the illegal annexation of Crimea. And I would say that this book is still very much inspired by the Revolution of Dignity of 2014, because it was a turning point when my generation saw that freedom needs to be fought for. So it cannot be just taken for granted. So this desire of freedom, or you can call it a freedom spirit, is something very inherent to Ukrainians. Probably one of the key characteristics when describing Ukrainians, but I believe that this spirit of freedom lives in every human being, and it also transforms a person in situations when freedom is being challenged. So this can happen in a wide span of situations, which I am exploring in the book. For example, like when a child is being brought up, or when a person enters a relationship and still wants to preserve the possibility of self-fulfillment and independence. Also a situation when someone is fighting a sickness and is confined to a hospital and the freedom is being limited. And of course, this grand situation, and a horrible one that we are living through right now, when an aggressor attacks your country and tries to take its independence away. So this entire exploration of the various topics is done under the shadow of the big war in the background, because there is war at that time going on in the east of Ukraine. Well, we all felt this. We felt the presence of this war. So the topic of war and the war itself is omnipresent in the book. This is the present war. But I was also looking at the past of the situations when freedom was being challenged, and I explored some personal stories, including those of my father in times of Soviet occupation of Ukraine, and also of my grandparents in times of World War II. Of course, this collection was written before the invasion, and I want to stress that. It's still, many of these poems still sound very relevant, and they sound as if they were written right now in the past 2 years. And they convey the wartime experience. So starting probably in March 2022, these poems from the collection were picked up on the internet and translated into various languages and spread and published worldwide, which was, of course, a surprise. So we have seen this huge interest in Ukrainian poetry since that time. And why? But because people wanted to understand what this war is and how it feels to live through this. And also the translating of this poetry was a way to show support to Ukraine, to show solidarity. And I also feel that the poetry is a powerful tool to spread the word about the Ukrainian wartime reality during Russia's aggression. So that is how and why this project came to life, and this book, The God of Freedom, appeared. Thank you, and I also would like to pass the word to Olena here.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the translation of God of Freedom. I met Yuliya in 2018 at the book forum in Lviv, and at that time she gave me her book Men, Women, and Children, which I read with great interest and loved it. And later, God of Freedom was passed on to me through a mutual friend of ours. I really like the powerful images in her poems and the way that even when she writes about daily life, there is a deeper meaning. So I was actually so inspired by the God of Freedom that I wrote a poem myself, which Yuliya then translated into Ukrainian. And we started discussing the translation of the book sometime in late 2021. Because Yuliya is a wonderful translator herself, she offered to step in as co-translator so that we would be sure to translate all the poems of the book and preserve the concept and flow. And as Yuliya mentioned, poetry is a great tool to spread the word about Ukrainian wartime reality, but also translation is as well. The demand for translation has really picked up, and it has provided us the opportunity to get the word about Ukraine to a wider audience. And in fact, we finished our first translation the evening before the full-scale Russian invasion. Our process was that we translated different poems in the book and came together to discuss the poems over Zoom, reading them aloud. So while we might have worked separately, we always came together to discuss and to read and to really think about the way things sounded. We later published the work in over 20 journals, and the first of those was AGNI, where Such Love, the first poem we translated, was published next to a poem by Robert Pinsky. I guess we will start our reading now.
Yes, please. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you.
I will start by reading the originals, and then maybe some poems at the end. I will just read the English translations. So let me start with the first one, which in English has the title Home to Freedom. And it's another remark I want to make, that the poems in the Ukrainian book, they don't usually have titles, but we decided to go with titles for every poem in the translated collection. Чоловік, який став для мене домом, хоче стати для мене свободою і не може. Йому здається, що я переграю, перебільшую, переінакшую слова знайомих давно пісень, розчленовую принципи каліграфії, перекручую молитви, рубаю з плеча, роблю з мухи слона, стріляю по горобцях з гармати. І взагалі, як уміститься в нашому домі стільки всього великого, стільки створінь і явищ, стільки неправдоподібних персонажів, стільки стихійних лих і глобальних проблем. Дім наш не гумовий, він цього точно не витримає, вибухне і зникне зі світу. Є тільки один вихід. Він навчиться рости, поступово ростиме, ростиме, поки не заполонить усе навколо, поки сам не стане свободою.
A home to freedom. The man that has become my home wants to become my freedom, but he's failing. He thinks that I'm overplaying, exaggerating, overwriting the words of familiar songs, ravaging the principles of calligraphy, distorting the words of prayers, acting recklessly, making a mountain out of a molehill, crushing a fly upon a wheel, and all that. How will our home have room for so many great things, so many phenomena and creations, so many implausible characters, natural disasters, and global issues? Our home is not a bottomless pit. It cannot hold all of this. It will explode and disappear off the face of the earth. There is only one solution. The home will learn to grow, gradually growing and growing until it fills everything around us, until it becomes freedom itself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olena. So the next poem I'm going to read It's written for my son. In this collection, there are several poems that are dedicated to him. And in English translation, it's called Boyhood. And it's actually the reflections of the worry of a mother about her son growing up, but of course, growing up in times like these, the times full of anxiety and worry about his future. Хлопчик. Відображення вгрузає в ліхтар. Золоті свічки, кавові зерна у високих чашах. Розгортається історія, за кадром кадр. Камера у марній спробі вгамувати час. Ямка на щоці, усередині невтомний млин. Стільки каміння перемелено, стільки криз. Перпетуум мобіле, нитка, що виводить земли. Зрілість на м'яких лапах підкрадається, наче рись. Що я можу? Заговорити придорожню траву, вигострити ножа, видати зброю, яку обере. Висіяти серед шуму тишу, місто, сполошений вулик, коридор із рядом зачинених наглухо дверей. Пожильці у масках, щільно приклеєних до облич, не одразу, але навчиться підбирати ключ. Відшукає таку, що вигадав собі колись. Принцесу, яка дракона подужала власноруч. Трохи дому, пестливе прізвисько, ретро-хіт. Трохи втіхи, шепотіти теплій долонці в руці. Не займати, доки обдумує наступний хід. Доки човник плине по меду і молоці.
Boyhood. The boy. An image stuffed into a lantern. Gold candles, coffee beans in tall cups. The story unfolds. Behind the frame is a frame. A camera tries in vain to stop time. A dimple on his cheek. Inside him, an ever-turning mill. How many stones did we grind? How many crises? A mobile perpetuum. A thread that leads from the mist. Maturity is creeping up on its soft paws like a lynx. What can I do? Charm the roadside grass. Sharpen a knife. Give away the chosen weapons. Sow silence among the noise. The city is a frightened hive. A hallway with a row of doors sealed shut. Inhabitants in masks, tightly glued to their faces. Not at once, but he will learn to locate the key. He will find the once imagined princess who slayed the dragon single-handedly. A bit of home, a tender nickname, a retro hit, a bit of delight, whispering into the warm palm of a hand, not rushing him as he contemplates his next step, while the boat sails across milk and honey.
Okay, so our next one is called in English The August Story. And we had a pleasure of having it published in The Common. And it is very much about the fact that this war has been going on for quite a long time, and it has taken its emotional toll. Якби їхня спільна історія так і не почалася, кожен зостався б сам на сам зі своєю війною. Серпень Пекельна тілами напхана лазня, вона стискає знайому долоню і оживає знову. Усе, що сталося і не сталося з ними, задавнене, прикладене каменем, незабуте, проступає візерунком на шкірі, снивом, збовтаним із реальністю, перешкоджає бути тут і тепер собою, дихати на повні груди. Листя починає жовтіти, він жартує невміло, так і не встигнемо напитися цієї отрути, пахощів літніх ринків, сонячного свавілля, дотиків плечей та колін, оголених та засмаглих, світла, що білою цівкою пробивається крізь біль. Відчуття, ніби це єдина мить, яку ти матимеш, аби закінчити речення, стиснути міцніш обійми. Чорна тінь відділяється і залишається на узбіччі. Крики придушені стануть круками, розкришаться угорі. Якщо захочеш розповісти мені, у чому річ, я слухатиму, тому прошу тебе, говори.
The August story. If their history together hadn't begun this way, they both would have been left alone, each with their war. August, hellish, the bathhouse filled with bodies. She squeezes the familiar hand and comes to life again. Everything that has happened and didn't happen to them is established, set in stone, unforgettable, a pattern that appears on skin in dreams, mixed with reality. It interferes with being your true self in the here and now, with taking a full breath of air. The leaves have begun to yellow. He jokes awkwardly. We won't have the chance to drink in this poison. The sense of summer markets, exploits made in the sun, the touch of shoulders and knees bare and tanned, the light that in a thin white beam breaks through pain, the feeling that this is the only moment that you'll have to finish a sentence, to embrace more tightly. A black shadow separates and lies on the roadside. The suppressed cries will become crows that crumble in the sky. If you decide to tell me what is going on, I'll listen. So I beg you, explain.
Okay, so the next one is called in translation, The Body. Тіло, поламана лялька, готельна кімната. Тіло, яке нічого мені не каже. Тіло, в якому живу і якого не знаю. Шкіра, як шкірка горіха, тонка й гірка. Довго зима волочила кіньми по дорозі. Бачиш, в уламок дзеркала ловить дихання. Щойно помітить життя, ознаку загрози. Схованки в чоботі, лезо витягне стиха. Як примиритися з тілом таким розкраяним, сотнями тисяч клаптів за вітром кинутих? Ріж свою лінію вздовж грудини, довга діра, наче тріщина, яка розділила материки. Думка, що доведеться ставити крапку. Темна, безпросвітна, пожежа густа й липка. Ледве останній спалах згасне, аж раптом з тіла проб'ються рожеві дзьоби тюльпанів.
Body. The body is a broken doll, a hotel room. The body which doesn't speak to you. The body which you live in and do not know. The skin, like the skin of a nut, thin and bitter. Winter dragged it by horses along the road. Watch how a shard of the mirror catches your breath. Noticing signs of life, signs of danger. Winter unsheaths a blade from inside her boot. How do you make peace with the body so cut up into 100,000 rags thrown to the wind? Slash your own line across your chest, a long hole like a crack that divides continents. The idea of placing the very last period is dark, opaque, a fire thick and oppressive. Just when you have gathered yourself, crumb by crumb, suddenly the red beaks of tulips emerge from your body.
Thank you, Olena. And we'll go to the next one. And in English, the title is A Soldier is Born. Кулі дощу вдаряють об дах, під дих. Що тобі сниться, поете теплого тилу? Злива голосить за ними, про них, тих, о. Згасло життя, наче пір'ячко полетіло. Пальці розламують хліб, скручують у ріг. Ліг і чекаєш пришестя, яке не настане. Знову ятряться лампадки уздовж доріг. П'явки чорних стрічок знекровлюють стяги. Вервичка із бабусиних квасолин, батькові теплі шкарпетки з кусючої вовни. Ним, тілом своїм, нову міситиме глину, із пробитих човнів, ротом черпатиме воду. Хто ти? З поглядом болючішим від прута, новонароджений, ув'язнений в однострій, непоказна, іграшкова фігурка з металу впала зі столу, пробила діру у земній корі.
A soldier is born. Bullets of rain hit the roof, hit me in the gut. What are you dreaming of, poet of the warm home front? The storm is wailing for them, mourning them quietly. Life went out as if a feather has flown away. Fingers break bread, put an enemy through the ringer. Laying down, he awaits the coming that will never be. Memorial candles lined up along the road again. Black ribbons like leeches beat at the flags. A rosary of beans picked by grandma. His father's warm socks made of scratchy wool. With all of this, with his body, he will knead the new clay with his mouth. He will scoop water from a leaky boat. Who are you, the one with a glance that hurts more than an iron rod, a newborn, or confined to a uniform? An inconspicuous metal toy figurine fell off the table, punched a hole in the earth's crust.
Yeah, and this is a poem, of course, dedicated to the Ukrainian soldiers, and especially those volunteers who have been joining the armed forces since the very beginning of Russia's aggression, and mostly common people, not professional military men or women. They have made this choice to defend the country's freedom and its future. And of course, it's about their courage, and they're willing to sacrifice themselves for this highest cause. And I should note that this very translation got Olena's work shortlisted for the Ukrainian Literature in Translation Prize by Ukrainian Institute, London. I will proceed with reading a poem. I'll just read it in English, and it's turning to the thing that I mentioned, that some of these poems they're relevant, but they have a different meaning than I actually inserted in them when I was writing them. So I will read this poem that is that has been written in COVID times. It's called Home, and it was featured in the Southern Review. Yeah, I was going to read it in English. Just a moment. So, I've planted a home for myself in a red flower pot, a place from which I never want to run, a word that melts in my mouth when I say it, a starting point that is marked on every map, a home embraced by trees, branches covering the door, fantastic beasts wander, pressing against our knees. How did we manage to imagine something so valuable and so everlasting in this fragile reality? A glamorous galaxy, a castle bandaged by mist, a dimension with an ongoing quest for the right words. How would we recognize each other under the gloomy sky, each of us pretending to be someone else? Look how our hands and hearts are bruised. Understandable when you must dig yourself out every day. On this earth, a territory of despair, it is hard to stop running, even if no one is chasing you. Here we turn on the light above the dinner table. Like a curious neighbor, the mistletoe peeks into our dreams. A train rumbling afar, a TV tower like a white fang. This is your stop. Exhale and then inhale again. So this poem, in fact, has taken on a different meaning. And when I read it, people perceive it as a poem about an abandoned home, or and how difficult it is to part with such a precious place that has such a great meaning. And it does have a great meaning to many Ukrainians. Even when they are forced to leave their home, they look very much forward to coming back, because home and family has a very special meaning for all Ukrainians. So the next one, and I think the last one we're going to read here, is also from those poems that have taken on a different meaning. I actually wrote this poem. It's on a subject of domestic violence, but then When the invasion has just begun, we all remember how Putin has addressed Ukraine with this very improper saying that Ukraine is a beauty that must endure everything that is done to her. So this metaphor of domestic violence is actually very much applicable to the situation of a country, a young country with a relatively young statehood being attacked by a powerful aggressor. So I'll start with the reading in Ukrainian. Зі мною цього ніколи не трапиться, каже собі, прасуючи сукню білу, мов чистий аркуш. Усі ті жінки, у кожної своя правда. Мабуть, недбало молились, не вміли плекати жар, не тримали під ліжком кореня мандрагори. Мабуть, не впорались. Мені це здалося, не варто брати до серця, міркує, змітаючи з підлоги рештки посуду. Свою несподівано таку крихку певність. У мого коханого все непросто. У мого коханого клопоти на роботі. У мого коханого настрій зіпсутий. У мого коханого непотамований голод, пошук тремкої здобичі, ганчір'яної ляльки з круглими очима, гудзиками. Занадто чепорилася для інших, занедбала домашні справи. Мабуть, була не досить привітною. Корону відростила, певно, таки загралась, розхитала підвалини затишного світу. За стінкою заходиться чуже немовля, нагадує про важливе. Настирливо народжуються хвилини запізнень. Не виносити сміття з хати, не згадувати лихе при столі, не при неділі, не ввечері важкого дня, не в свято, не в піст. Коли вона приходить до мене з розпухлою губою, з ретельно замаскованим на вилиці синім птахом, я не кажу їй, мабуть, ти не. Натомість за нас обох видихаю, перегортай, моя мила, перегортай.
Perhaps you didn't. This will never happen to me, she says, ironing her dress, white like a blank page. All these women, each has her own truth. Perhaps they prayed carelessly, couldn't keep the hearth, didn't put a mandragora root under their bed. Perhaps they just couldn't manage it. It's just me imagining. I mustn't take it to heart, she ponders, sweeping the floor scattered with broken dishes, her certainty suddenly so fragile. My loved one, it's not so easy for him. My loved one has troubles at work. My loved one's mood is ruined. My loved one struggles with an untamed hunger, the search for an easy target, a stuffed doll with round button eyes. You were busy making yourself beautiful, neglecting housework. Perhaps you weren't considerate enough, grew yourself a crown. Perhaps you have gone too far, swayed the foundation of this cozy world. A neighbor's baby is crying behind the wall, reminding you of what is crucial. Annoyingly, only minutes of tardiness are being borne. Don't air your dirty linen in public. Don't talk of nasty things at the table, on Sunday morning, on a hard day's night, on a holiday, or at Lent. When she comes to me with her swollen lip, with a carefully masked bluebird on her temple, I don't tell her, perhaps you didn't. Instead, for both of us, I tell her, turn the page, darling, turn the page.
Thank you, Olena. And I think this poem also addresses so many claims that Ukraine has in some way provoked the aggression. This parallel is so clear that the world was cozy and everything was going as usual. And suddenly we are trying to resist. Ukraine is resisting the aggression, trying to change things, and the world is changing accordingly together with this fight. So I think this poem is pretty symbolic, that we should just turn the page. And of course, it's a struggle to do that, but there is no other choice.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Yuliya. And thank you, Olena. That's a very powerful and beautiful poems and your readings. Part of a wave of just incredible poetry that's been coming from Ukraine, especially as of late. So thank you for sharing that with us. Yuliya, your poetry, I'm so excited that this book is coming out. So when is it exactly coming out? Like tomorrow or yesterday or yeah? Oh, you can't hear you. Sorry. Can you repeat that, please?
So the book is already here, and we have the official launch at Cambridge on May 5th. It's the Arrowsmith Spring Book Launch, but the book is available right now. It can be ordered. Well, I also want to say that the art for the book is created by the same artists who have created and illustrated the Ukrainian book here. She has taken a new take on the topic, but still I think it's pretty symbolic. So there's this also a connection between these two books in a way.
And who's the artist? The name of the artist?
It's Anastasia Starko. She is a Chernobyl-born artist, and she has recently received a special award for illustrating the God of Freedom from Bologna Book Fair in Italy. We just got the news some days ago.
Now we're very much looking forward to getting a copy of the book. I first came across your poetry in various anthologies that came out over the years. And I was just kind of looking through them again, preparing for today's meeting. I think first time was an anthology called This.
Oh, yes,
Yes.
that's an old one. Yes.
Very old one. But then another one was this more kind of comprehensive anthology, which was a Polish and Ukrainian, I think, co-publication.
And in Ukrainian and English. There
And
were
English, yes.
two editions.
Yes, and in one of the poems that I noticed that was in this anthology, and this kind of got me thinking to something you said today. The first line in English, I'll translate it, translated by Anatoly Kudryavitsky. What's in your emergency bag, they ask me. How can it be that you haven't packed it yet? And I want to ask you about this because I've been working with a lot of texts in the last couple of years, Ukrainian texts in the last couple of years, and I've even made a count of how many times the emergency bag has appeared, both in essays and in poetry. And I just wanted to ask you, was this like, how did that appear in the poem back then? Because I think the publication is like 2016 or something. Was this in reference to the Russian invasion of Donbass in 2014, or was it something else? How did this object that became so prevalent in poetry these days appear in a poem in 2016 or whenever it was written, because it's not dated in this anthology?
It's actually the poem from my 2015 collection, Men, Women, and Children. So I think it was written in 2014, and it was after the Revolution of Dignity has won. And although we had this emotional rise that the democracy has prevailed and now we're going to decide our own fate as a country and we had cut these ties with Russia, there was still this feeling of a huge danger still hanging over us, and this expectation of premonition of the big war. So this was something that I was reflecting on. If I'm to leave my home, what is it I'm going to take with me? And that poem has resurfaced, of course, when the invasion began. And I have quite a great deal of poems in the 2015 collection that address the war in a different way. And some of them are, I think they are included in another anthology, Voices of Freedom, from 2023, I think, because they were so relevant. And because for us, we know the Ukrainian history throughout the centuries, and it was quite clear that Russia's imperial ambitions will not give them any choice other than pursue the new colonization of Ukraine in a way. Mm-hmm. So we actually felt that coming, and even rationally, you could tell that the big war is coming. Yes, mm-hmm. This was not about Donbass. This was about this premonition of a big war.
Yeah, thank you. Because and I do want to talk about a little bit about what has changed in Ukrainian literature, in the last 2 years, because many things have. And I want to encourage people to also get in the discussion. Please input your questions, and I'd be happy to read them. But yeah, and I want to talk about how Ukrainian literature has changed, and Olena also has translated a lot, so maybe Olena can answer. But when something like this resurfaces, like you mentioned, taking on a different meaning or taking on a more of a significance and becomes part of this vocabulary of the word now, which you use so much, it makes you thinking that, yes, a lot of things have changed in Ukrainian literature, but a lot of things that are coming up now were always there. They were just kind of, we got this independence 30 years ago, and they kind of went by the wayside because Ukrainian literature, Ukrainian poetry wanted to kind of, go and explore new areas and also do other things. But I think a lot of things that are surfacing now that are so prevalent in this literature, they've always been there. They've just kind of been muted and waiting. And that's why when something like that shows up, it's everybody's, and not just in your work, in other works as well. Everybody's in awe that, oh my God, how could people have foreseen these things? But that's what you're saying. There's always kind of been there. It's just, unfortunately, for because of the geopolitical position, the history of Ukraine, that it informs Ukrainian literature so much. But I think it's just like the invasion of Ukraine and what Ukraine is dealing with didn't just happen 2 years ago. This didn't just come out of the blue. The same way that the way our literature and our culture is responding to this has always been there. It's just responding at the particular time in a particular way. That said, things have changed. I mean, we can say that Ukrainian literature of the last 10 years, but especially of the last 2 years or so has changed. What have you seen? What has changed in Ukrainian literature? And are these changes that you think are here to stay, or is it this a temporary thing, or are things so profoundly changed that this is really going to be kind of the way it is moving forward? Yuliya?
Do you mean in the past 2 years since the full-scale invasion? Yes. Well, I think the first weeks of the invasion, we are mostly focused on the practical things. Everybody stopped writing for a short while, at least for a short while. And then people were trying to regain the ability to speak as poets, as authors, and also felt the need to speak in a way. Either it's poetry or these are articles or interviews. It was so important to not to stay silent and to spread the word about our experiences. Of course, now there's this huge number of authors writing from the front line. We have now increasing number of authors poets, and I would say non-fiction writers, because this isn't in no way a fiction. Now it's not time for fiction. We say that many times, we repeat it in discussions, that now it's time either for nonfiction, for diaries, for essays, or for poetry, which is of course a strong emotional tool or means to share the experience. So a great number of military poets. It's either those writers who have joined the army and continued writing, or those that have discovered their talent for writing in the trenches. Mm-hmm. And there are many who have transformed their style. I can mention here, for example, a great young poet, Artur Droń, who is 23, and he has published his second book of poetry, which is extraordinary, and it conveys the experiences from the front line, and you can clearly see how he has extremely grown as a poet. He has gone through a transformation, which is life for which is near-death experience, and losses of his friends, and many other things he went through. So his collection, We Were Here, it's called in English. It's a very powerful collection. It has also already been translated into Swedish, and I'm sure it will be translated in more languages. Another great example of the poet that has changed his style or her style is Yelisaveta Zharikova, who is a combat medic, and also her style and her writing has elevated very much. And of course, it's a horrible experience to go through, but the power of her poetry has grown tremendously. Well, there are many names like that, and I really encourage you and everyone who is interested in Ukrainian literature to try to discover Ukrainian military poets. We have lost one very talented young poet, Maxim Krivtsov, just recently in January. And he was the one who has published his first book, a very powerful book of poetry with a lot of experience from the front line. But he didn't get to present it. Mm-hmm. But we have this book, and I'm sure we will take it to many audiences internationally. We as his colleagues, as his fellow colleagues, fellow writers, we would help his voice to sound further on, even if he's no longer with us. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's now mostly writing about the wartime reality. And many poets I know testify that they have had difficulties in finding the language to speak about these unspeakable things that we have been living through. You know, this idea of the crumbling world order, that anything can happen, and about the experiences of losing your closest, your loved ones, and this daily danger of huge losses that can come. But I mean, we know that we must not stay silent. So most of the authors have regained their ability to write. But I think the language has been broken and reassembled. And in the long run, we will be observing and analyzing how this has happened and the consequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I noticed in Ukraine that there were these sections already of literature published by soldiers on the front. And how to explain to us how does the public, the Ukrainian reading public, do they go and actively purchase these books, or is this more online? How is this audience reading these new poets from the trenches? How does that work?
Well, we all have social media, and Facebook is very big in Ukraine, and mostly those soldiers, they in their spare time, they're able to post this on Facebook, and via social media, that is how it reaches the audience. But then when when the books get published, and of course we as fellow writers and colleagues are helping this poetry to turn into books, and publishers understand the importance as well. So I think it's going both through books and through social media. But in Ukraine, social media has been a great, effective channel of reaching the audience, not just in Ukraine, but also internationally. And that is how this happened in the spring of 2022, when you posted some poem or someone has found your poem online, and then you wake up in the morning and you see it translated into, I don't know, Estonian or Vietnamese or very, different languages. Maybe Olena can talk more about the translation.
So I can mention what the situation for Ukrainian literature in the United States is a little bit, how it has changed since the full-scale Russian invasion, sorry. So first off, I would like to say that there are many poets publishing through American presses. So Lost Horse Press and Arrowsmith are really good examples. So is Plowman Press. One of the poets that have come from Lost Horse Press, which is Natalka Bilocerkiewicz, who has been published by Lost Horse Press, is a poet that Yuliya and I can both relate to a lot. She's one of the first poets that I translated, and it's really great to see her work out in the public. Also Mykola Horbal is another poet who's been published by Lost Horse Press, who is kind of lost before, but has now been found. In general, literary magazines are more apt to publish Ukrainian work, it seems now. Just from the experience that Yuliya and I had, we were published first in AGNI and then Southern Review and Common, and we have a poem forthcoming in Calyx now. So those are just some examples of literary magazines that seem interested in publishing Ukrainian work.
Yeah,
and I should definitely mention here that we have a Ukrainian poet shortlisted for the Griffin Prize. It's Helena Kruk's collection, which is quite a lot, which speaks a lot about the war. It's the main topic of the collection.
And that was also published by Lost Horse Press, the translation, no?
No, the Arrowsmith Press.
Oh, Arrowsmith.
It's the same publisher as my book is coming from.
Wonderful. Yeah, Olena, you've really been in the middle a lot of these translations, and you're translating some of the best poets in Ukraine. And thank you for sharing how you became acquainted with Yuliya's poetry, and that was going to be one of my questions for you. But how do you? I'm sure you probably have several projects in the works. Just knowing you, how do you decide who to work with? And you managed to make some really good decisions, because I know you can't translate everything these days. It's not like back in the day where you would have to. There are more offers oftentimes now than there's time to do. So, what are is it also online? Is it through connections that you have? Is it through colleagues? Like, how do you decide?
It's definitely through people that I know. I started out, one of the first poets who I met in New York was Vasil Makhno. So I started out doing some of his work, just a couple poems probably. And then eventually I did his collection, the Paper Bridge. But he kind of led me to other people, because I think he led me eventually to Helena Kruk, who I translated a few poems by her for Poetry International initially. I'm back in something like 2007, I want to say. So I feel that one poet kind of opens the world of Ukrainian literature up in a very interesting way and leads to more poets and more books. Also, initially too, I had a really good experience at Harvard Ukrainian Summer School, and my roommate there, after she went back to Ukraine, she sent me some books of Ukrainian literature, and that was really just eye-opening and wonderful. And I wasn't that fluent in Ukrainian then, so I would read them and translate just to kind of understand them. So that was my first experience with translation, and then it built up. So like first Vasil, and then others, and now yeah, it was really a pleasure to meet Yuliya at the book forum in Lviv, which is just another wonderful opportunity to be exposed to Ukrainian literature and meet wonderful people and go to events and kind of see what's out there that you might have missed.
So basically, this Lviv Book Fair is one of the two biggest in Ukraine in terms of literary events. And when there's a mingling, there's always some introductions and conversations and exchanging books, and you never know. I mean, it's not intentional. You never know what can come out of these meetings. So it's a very pleasant outcome, I would say.
Yeah, and this kind of compactness of the city, it's hard not to meet someone who is working on some kind of literary project, whether translating or presenting their new poems at panels. Yeah, it's a wonderful forum. And again, I'm calling on anyone who has questions to get in on the discussion. Going back to the poetry, and Olena has sent me some translations, a few that you read today, but some that you didn't. But I assume they're all going to be in this, or are in this latest publication by Arrowsmith Press. But I noticed certain motifs that were showing up in the 6 poems that I received. Several of them dealt with these ideas of kind of spaces and closed spaces, and kind of this almost feeling a need to go beyond the space, or to redefine whether it's a home, a need for some kind of expansion. And another one was this kind of what you told me about broken language, but maybe think of that also, but kind of just like this things up like knots in throats, birds in throats, lumps in throats. I think there were 3 poems that dealt with a throat. And I know you said that a lot of these poems are written earlier, but of course, you think of the war now. And is this kind of what you meant by when you mentioned today this idea of freedom being challenged, and this idea that things need to be reshaped in order to encompass all these new changes, all these new emotions that are happening, and this going back to our original question that we talked about, this kind of drive for this freedom that's ever present in this literature, but finding and in these forms, that's kind of how I saw it in the poetry. Could that be what's possibly in there, or how would you comment on that?
That's a very interesting question. It's very multi-layered as well.
Yeah.
Well, what I was thinking, especially with a reference to this poem, "The Home of Freedom," with the home growing, and not being indifferent. I actually have the poem in my earlier collection in 2015, which is about Philadelphia. And it happens, there's a conversation happening at Macy's in Philadelphia, and I'm having this chat with the saleswoman, and we have exchanged a couple of words, and then in this imaginary conversation goes on, and there's a quote: "We are children of the common home, or the same home." So this is more about this, about the engagement. How can you not care of what's going on somewhere, maybe not close to you, but somewhere in the world, and there's injustice, and where this injustice can also grow, like freedom can grow and it can affect you. So it's, it's easier to nip it in the bud, let's say. So that is what I was thinking, because there are people who can still stay indifferent to what's going on under their nose. Like we, for example, see in Russia, the completely passive society whose country is doing the brutal, aggressive, genocidal war on the neighboring country where probably their friends or relatives live. But they justify these horrible massacres by saying, "Oh, this is none of our business. The state knows better." So this is what I actually meant. That this is we have our common home, and what happens in one part of the world can happen in another as well. It's horrifying to think that Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale contains so many horrible things, but as she said, that all of these things have been happening in this world at some point of time, somewhere. So everything is interconnected, and I mean, it's about engagement, and it's how this the phenomena of cultural activism in Ukraine has appeared. We didn't wish for this role, but we felt that it was an opportunity to urge the people not to stay indifferent to what happens in Ukraine, because this is the fight against democracy. And, if failed, it will definitely affect the entire world order.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think that this experience, this terrible experience that Ukrainians are experiencing, makes them more attuned that they're living to a common home, and that they will also pay attention to the plight of other people who are suffering injustices in the world? So, like, we talked about what's changed in literature, and like, is that something that Ukrainians will be more open to now after this is over? Or is it too late to say?
It is so difficult to think so much ahead, because we are so focused on survival right now. I mean, it is impossible to describe what is happening when you read a notification of a missile flying at your city, and your child is at school, for example. And you cannot do anything about it, and it's a complete terror. I mean, I don't think we need to. I think Ukrainians don't have resource for that right now, but I mean, I think we will change after this. Definitely, this will be a huge transformation. And I hope this will be the victory that will change us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I don't see any questions coming in from the online audience. I know that you've just started, Yuliya, your tour with presentations, yes, of the US with this book, and I know you were traveling, I think you said, to the West Coast. But I would perhaps finish up, if we don't have any more questions, with yet another anthology where I found a poem of yours, this one a little closer to home. Thank you for mentioning Philadelphia, but let's go back to New York now. And this wonderful anthology, edited and introduced by Ostap Keen, called New York Elegies, published by Academic Studies Press. You have a poem about New York, written in 2016, and you have this line, "Why do you need this?" And this is in translation, "Why do you need this bitter and bitten Big Apple?" And it's a beautiful poem, and it has this kind of up and down vertical motion. It ends with "Fire escapes a red building shooting into the sky," or something like that. So I know you've been here for several days. It's not your first trip to New York. What caught your attention during this visit? Obviously, you go to Macy's, you listen to conversations, and then you build upon these things. What impressions are you taking with you this time when you head home from New York in these few days that you've been here or will be here? Anything in particular?
Actually, this poem is in the book.
Ah,
It's included here in the book.
okay.
And the last time I was here was 2015.
Mhm.
I think the matter of traveling and taking the travel was completely different. And the Macy's poem from Philadelphia, it was even earlier from earlier visit. So now I think we take the entire surrounding as a parallel reality, which doesn't seem quite real, 100% real. It feels like it's now there's going to be a glitch and we're going to be back to our everyday trials, I would say. So what I have noticed, I've been to New York in colder weather usually, and I love the Central Park, but I came here in I think it was late autumn, and the park was completely empty, and I had it all to myself, and I really enjoyed it. I love it. I have this favorite place in Central Park where there's an underground passage with the painted walls, and there's always some musician playing there. And there was a musician this time as well. But in Central Park, it was crowded, and I I saw so many people, and it was not like I was used to. So there was this change, although I was able to enjoy the blooming trees and so on. But I love that solitude in the Central Park, and I mean, I don't think there's any opportunity for solitude here in New York. That is why it's another reason to miss Lviv. That's where I come from.
Yeah, it's been unseasonably warm as well in New York. That's really getting the people out of their homes and taking away the solitude from each other. But yes, of course, the parallel reality, it is. I realize it's very different. You know, leaving a war zone, a country under war, it's so different that it must be quite different this time around. But I'm very happy that you managed to come out, and I think it's important that you read your poetry and talk to people and tell people about what's happening in Ukraine and how Ukrainian culture is dealing with it. So I want to thank you for visiting us. I want to really thank also Olena Jennings for once again helping us out and for your wonderful translations and for helping the wonderful work of Yuliya and her poetry reach people here in the US. So good luck. Congratulations on the book, and I look forward to maybe meeting in person next time around.
Thank you, Mark. And we will have another event in New York on May 9th at New York Public Library together with Ilya Kaminsky. So if you have a chance, please join us.
Yes, and thank you all for tuning in today and for attending our events this semester. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.